It started as a joke. A stupid, late-night, wine-fueled joke between me and my roommate after a terrible job interview where I froze when asked, "Describe a time you overcame adversity." I answered, "I once ate 2 Chipotle burritos in one sitting, and I don't think the hiring manager appreciated my gastrointestinal grit." That night, while ranting and reapplying for jobs online, I jokingly filled out a resume on a random international job board and added something ridiculous under special skills. I typed, "Fluent in Croatian. Strong experience with regional folk dancing. Certified goat herder." My roommate dared me to click submit. I did. Then we ordered tacos and forgot about it. Until 2 weeks later, I got an email with a subject line that said, "Congratulations. Cultural Experience Manager Role, Plitvice Hospitality Group." I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it. But the logo looked real. And the message wasn't asking me to wire money, it was welcoming me aboard. There was even a PDF offer letter. The salary was decent, the contract was short-term, and the job came with free housing. In Croatia. I burst out laughing. I read it out loud to my roommate. She screamed. "You have to go," she said, already Googling traditional Croatian dances. "They think I can herd goats," I protested. "You once made a goat sound at karaoke. You're halfway there." I didn't intend to accept. But the more I read the offer, the more curious I got. A month in the mountains, paid to manage cultural experiences at a resort that hosted tourists and travel bloggers? I hadn't been out of the country in 5 years. I was between jobs. I had no ties. So I replied, excited to join the team, and packed my suitcase with hiking boots, a thrifted blazer, and 3 YouTube playlists on Balkan folk traditions. The moment I landed in Croatia, I knew I was in way over my head. The flight had been long. The customs officer raised an eyebrow at my purpose of visit, cultural experience manager. He repeated, and I pretended to check my non-existent itinerary like I had important ambassadorial duties. A driver named Luca was waiting for me at arrivals, holding a sign that said Mr. Goat, which I later found out was a misinterpretation of my goat herding certification line. I didn't correct him. I got into the van and immediately tried to discreetly open Google Translate, but we lost service halfway through the drive up into the mountains. The resort, Plitvice Peaks, was straight out of a Wes Anderson film. Charming, weird, and staffed by people who seemed way too excited to meet me. "Ah, the expert from America," said Petra, the resort director. "We're thrilled. The mayor wants to meet you." "Mayor?" I echoed, panic rising. "Yes. He's very proud of our traditions, and your program has such originality." Originality was a generous way of saying no one else had applied. Petra showed me to a small but cozy cabin, handed me a binder labeled Weekly Programming, and asked if I needed anything. I almost said, "A way out," but smiled and said, "Just a few hours to settle in." Inside the binder was a list of events I was expected to lead: traditional dance night, goat milking demo, storytelling in Croatian, and something called cultural interpretation of modern pop hits. I sat on the bed, staring at the list like it might rearrange itself into something manageable. It didn't. I Googled how to fake being Croatian and got deeply unhelpful results. I decided to start with the easiest task, learning the dance. How hard could it be? I spent 3 hours that night in my cabin trying to mimic YouTube videos of men in embroidered shirts doing complicated footwork while holding hands. I twisted my ankle tripping over a suitcase but managed to sort of master one dance called Kolo. The next morning, I met the mayor. He gave me a jar of pickled something and said, through Petra translating, "We are so proud to have our traditions represented by such a passionate foreigner." I thanked him with a bow I hope looked respectful and not like I was about to lose my balance. That afternoon, I led my first workshop, Kolo dancing, with 10 tourists, all influencers. I turned on the music, smiled wide, and hoped no one noticed I was slightly limping. They clapped. They filmed me. One woman tagged me on Instagram as @Goat Dance King. And somehow, that's the name that stuck. By day 5, I was low-key famous. Not paparazzi at the airport famous, more like locals waved when I walked into the bakery famous. They'd shout, "Goat King," and I'd nod like royalty, even though inside I was Googling how to not get deported for lying. Somehow, the dance class had gone viral on TikTok. A British travel vlogger posted a video of me teaching the Kolo, calling me the goat guru of Plitvice, and it racked up nearly 700,000 views. I was wearing a borrowed vest, a slightly crooked mustache drawn with eyebrow pencil, and my right ankle was taped with athletic wrap under my sock. People thought I was authentic. "Your style is very avant-garde," Petra told me after seeing the video. "It brings new light to old ways." I nodded like I'd meant to revolutionize centuries of tradition with uneven footwork and panic in my eyes. Meanwhile, I was ducking actual goats. On my second Monday, I was asked to supervise the interactive goat herding experience. I said yes, of course, because what else could I say? I figured the goats would be fenced in, the guests would pet them, and I'd stand nearby smiling like a proud farm boy turned folk hero. I was wrong. The goats were not fenced in. They were free roaming. 37 of them. I counted. The handler handed me a bell, said something in Croatian I didn't catch, and walked off. Just left me there. Alone. With goats. I tried to look authoritative. I rang the bell. They ignored me. I clapped. Nothing. Then, like some tragic Disney reboot, I was headbutted by a goat named Zarko who, according to Petra later, likes to test boundaries. I stumbled, dropped the bell, and watched it roll directly under the angriest-looking goat in the herd. A family of Dutch tourists filmed the entire thing. Their youngest child shouted, "Run, Goat King." And I did. Not far. Just behind a shed until the handler returned, laughing and holding a bucket of goat snacks. That evening, the video of me running from Zarko was posted with the caption, "When your resume finally catches up to you." It went viral. Again. Petra called me into her office the next morning. I braced for the truth bomb, for the awkward question, for the polite dismissal. Instead, she said, "You are a sensation. Tourism numbers are up. People want to book the full Goat King experience. We added it to the package." I blinked. The what? She showed me the flyer, a full-day event with dance, folklore, and a reenactment of the brave Goat King's first encounter. I had been turned into a legend, based on a lie. I wanted to confess. I really did. But then the mayor texted me a goat emoji followed by 3 fire emojis and asked if I'd like to judge the annual Cheese and Folk Parade next weekend. So naturally, I said yes. The Cheese and Folk Parade was apparently the social event of the season in this corner of Croatia, and as the newly crowned Goat King, I had the honor of being its first ever cultural marshal. A title no one could really explain to me but sounded prestigious enough to roll with. I was given a sash, bright red, embroidered, with tiny goats dancing across it, and a ceremonial staff topped with what looked suspiciously like a repurposed chair leg. Petra said it had been in the archives. I chose not to ask more questions. The day of the parade, the entire village turned out. There were cheese carts, folk dancers, children in tiny traditional outfits throwing flower petals, and a float entirely covered in wheels of goat cheese with a cutout of my face on it. "You're aware I'm not Croatian, right?" I whispered to Petra. She nodded cheerfully. "Yes, but your spirit is very Balkan." I had no idea what that meant, but it felt like a compliment. I was asked to give a speech. I panicked. I had nothing prepared, so I did what any underqualified public figure would do. I channeled a Disney movie. I stood at the microphone, raised the staff slightly, and said, "Tradition is not about perfection. It's about joy. It's about keeping the past dancing in the present." The crowd erupted in applause. Someone tossed a flower crown at me. An elderly woman kissed my hand. I think I accidentally proposed to her. After the parade, we all gathered for cheese judging. I was told to rate each entry from 1 to 5 on texture, authenticity, and emotional cheese journey, which is not something I ever trained for, but I've seen enough cooking shows to fake it. I used words like earthy, soulful, and cheeky. People nodded respectfully. One judge scribbled down my notes like they were gospel. Somewhere around my 7th cheese tasting, I started to sweat. Not just from lactose, but from guilt. I had spent 3 weeks lying, improvising, and miraculously dodging discovery. I hadn't even been to a dance class before arriving, let alone milked anything. My Croatian vocabulary still consisted of hello, goat, and very good cheese. And yet, people looked at me like I was a national treasure. That evening, at the closing ceremony, Petra handed me a plaque. It read, "For outstanding cultural revival and inspirational goat leadership." I laughed. Loud. Too loud. "Petra," I said, "you do know I made most of this up, right?" She paused, then smiled with a mischievous twinkle. "Of course. But sometimes, stories are more useful than facts." And then she added, "Besides, do you think you're the first?" That's when I learned the previous cultural experience manager had claimed to be a llama whisperer from Peru. She was from Ohio. Once I found out I wasn't the first resume enhancer to charm their way into this job, the guilt that had been gnawing at my ribs turned into something else, comradeship. Apparently, the resort had a long, unofficial tradition of hiring colorful candidates who brought more enthusiasm than credentials. Petra showed me a dusty album in her office labeled Legends of Experience, which included a guy who claimed to be a Viking brewer, actually a chemistry teacher from Denmark, and a woman who once led a silent meditation hike and got lost for 2 days, but returned with a new trail map and an injured duck she named Kiki. "The guests love a story," Petra said. "And you, my friend, are a very good one." I couldn't argue with that. But the more time I spent in Plitvice, the more I realized I actually liked what I was doing. Sure, it had started as a joke, but somehow I had stumbled into the kind of life I didn't know I needed. Days were filled with laughter, awkward dancing, confused goats, and nightly bonfires where guests toasted marshmallows and asked me to interpret folk tales I barely remembered from Wikipedia. I started learning real Croatian phrases. I actually did some goat herding, under strict supervision. And weirdly enough, I got good at it. Zarko, the angry goat from day one. Now he followed me around like a loyal, judgmental dog. Reina, the resort cook, started handing me secret cheese samples before they hit the buffet. One morning, I woke up to a hand-drawn Goat King comic strip slipped under my cabin door by a kid named Leo, who said I was like a wizard but cooler. My imposter syndrome didn't go away. It just learned to wear a folkloric vest and dance a little. But the real twist came when I was invited to do a live interview on a Croatian morning talk show. It's just a short spot, Petra assured me. They want you to talk about bringing international attention to the region. I nearly dropped my fork. Petra, I can't go on live TV. I don't even speak Croatian. You speak joy, she said dramatically, as if that was an actual language. The day of the interview, they drove me to Zagreb and gave me a makeover. I was put in a crisp linen shirt, traditional woven belt, and had my hair styled in what can only be described as folk chic. I sat down on the set between two hosts who looked like toothpaste models and prayed I wouldn't throw up. The first few questions were translated for me through an earpiece. I answered them honestly, vaguely, and with what I hoped was a wise smile. But then they handed me a wooden flute. Please, the host said in English, play for us the goat summoning tune. I blinked. The what? From the video, she said, excited. The one where you called the goats from the forest? I froze. I had no idea what she was talking about. Until they played a clip. Me from week 2, whistling and tapping a spoon on a bucket to get the goats to come for snacks. Someone had dubbed it with dramatic music and titled it The Ancient Summoning Song. The audience was clapping. The host was beaming. The camera was rolling. So I raised the flute, took a breath, and made a sound that can only be described as a confused duck in therapy. And the crowd went wild. I don't know what possessed me to play that wooden flute like my life depended on it, but I went for it. 3 squeaky notes in, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. By note 4, the microphone was picking up what sounded like a kazoo having a midlife crisis. But here's the kicker, the audience loved it. The host clapped. The producers gave me a thumbs up from behind the camera, and someone even shouted, "Bravo!" like I had just performed Beethoven with my nostrils. I finished with a dramatic flourish, bowed slightly, and said, "For the goats," which got translated immediately by the interpreter into something poetic sounding that made the audience erupt with laughter and applause. The segment ended with a photo montage of me herding goats, dancing awkwardly in embroidered pants, and waving from the cheese float like I'd just won an agricultural pageant. I thought I'd leave the studio and disappear quietly back to the village. I was wrong. When I stepped outside, 2 teenagers recognized me and asked for a selfie. Then a woman handed me a basket of pastries for the journey. By the time we got back to the resort that night, Petra met me with a grin so wide it looked like her face might split. "You," she said, "are trending again. #GoatSummoner." I opened my phone to find dozens of tags, memes, and even a remix of my flute solo set to electronic beats. One video had edited goats running in slow motion toward me while hearts and sparkles floated across the screen. It had over 1 million views. "Petra," I said slowly, "I think I've peaked." "Not yet," she said, her eyes gleaming with terrifying optimism. "The Minister of Tourism wants to meet you." I almost choked on a pastry. "Why?" "He's very curious about your methods." "But I don't have methods. I have mild panic attacks in Google Translate." "Exactly," she replied. Authenticity. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a red flag. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a made-up skill on a fake resume turned into a national identity. I came here to ride out a joke. I ended up riding a goat-themed career trajectory straight into viral fame. And yet, a tiny part of me didn't want it to end. It was the most accidental but real joy I'd felt in years. I was still an imposter, sure. But maybe I wasn't the only one. Maybe the world was just full of people dancing awkwardly in borrowed shoes, hoping nobody noticed they were making it up. By week 7, my inbox was a circus. I had emails from a Croatian pop group asking if I'd cameo in their next video as the symbolic spirit of rural pride, a German travel magazine requesting a full interview, and someone from the American consulate who simply wrote, "You're becoming quite the story, huh?" with a winking emoji that felt both encouraging and slightly threatening. Petra was thrilled. "You've sparked a tourism boom," she said, holding a spreadsheet like it was a love letter. Bookings have doubled. Even the goat milk soaps are selling out. I wasn't sure if I should be proud or call a lawyer. Meanwhile, the village kids had started performing an imitation of my flute-playing routine during recess. One boy even made his own sash and introduced himself as Goat King Jr. in front of a bewildered British couple. I didn't correct him. Who was I to crush ambition? Then came the invitation I couldn't ignore. A national festival in Dubrovnik was honoring innovators of cultural heritage, and they wanted me to be the keynote speaker. Keynote. I croaked. Like, speak. Yes. Petra said, clapping. They want you to talk about the role of folklore in modern identity. I stared at her. Petra, I lied on a resume. The only folklore I know is what I pieced together from a travel blog and 2 videos with auto-generated captions. She paused, then smiled. And yet, look at you now. The day of the speech arrived faster than I could prepare for. I spent the train ride to Dubrovnik watching TED Talks and rehearsing in the reflection of the window. I still didn't know what I was going to say. When I took the stage, the room was packed, academics, officials, artists. A man in a tailored suit whispered, "We're so honored. Your story is truly mythic." That word struck me. Mythic. Not real, but meaningful. I stepped up to the microphone and did the only thing I could. I told the truth. Well, most of it. I said I had come to Croatia by accident. That I wasn't a scholar or an expert. That I didn't grow up with these traditions, but I fell in love with them. I said I wasn't fluent in the language, but I learned to speak the culture with my feet, my hands, my heart. And then I said something I didn't expect to say. Sometimes, the stories we make up to get by become the stories that carry us forward. We fake it until it becomes true, not in our resume, but in our bones. There was silence. Then a wave of applause. Not polite applause, real, standing, clapping like they meant it applause. I blinked, smiled, bowed, and quietly whispered to myself, well, that's one way to not get fired. After the Dubrovnik speech, I thought things might finally start settling down. I was wrong. 2 days later, Petra burst into my cabin with the kind of wide-eyed expression reserved for lottery wins or goat stampedes. You got a book deal, she shouted, waving an email printout like it was a golden ticket. I blinked at her. I got a what? Apparently, a small European publishing house that specialized in modern folklore and culturally rich narratives wanted me to write a memoir. The title they suggested? Goat King, An Accidental Legacy. I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on myself and said, who would read that? Petra didn't miss a beat. Everyone. I wasn't convinced, but I said yes anyway. Mostly because the idea of writing everything down felt like the only way to make sense of it all. I started that evening, sitting on the porch of my cabin with a goat snoozing 2 feet away and my laptop balanced on my knees. The words came slowly at first, but once I stopped trying to make it sound impressive and just told the truth about the fake resume, the first goat chase, the panic flute on live TV, it all poured out like melted cheese on a warm plate. Meanwhile, my job was evolving. I wasn't just the Goat King anymore. I was suddenly Director of Experiential Folklore with a laminated badge to prove it. Petra assigned me 2 new trainees, a Canadian woman who wore cowboy boots and claimed she could speak to horses, and a guy from France who said he had a spiritual connection to accordion music. Neither of them had any actual experience, which made them perfect for the job. I taught them everything I knew. How to earn a goat's trust, hint, raisins, how to improvise a folktale when you forget the ending, and how to confidently mispronounce things until someone corrects you kindly. One afternoon, while scribbling notes for Chapter 6 of my book, tentatively titled, When the Goat Bites Back, I got a letter. A real, paper letter with a return address from the U.S. It was from the hiring manager at that job I'd bombed before all of this started, the Chipotle burrito interview. Her note read, saw you on Croatian television. Laughed so hard I nearly fell off my Peloton. You were right. That was adversity. Let's do lunch if you're ever back stateside. You're onto something weird and wonderful. Keep going. I taped it to the wall of my cabin. Later that day, I found a crumpled drawing slipped under my door. It was from one of the guests' kids, me riding a goat, wearing a crooked crown and waving a block of cheese. Underneath, it read, you are the best mistake that ever happened. I didn't cry, but I smiled so hard it hurt. By the time summer rolled around, I had become more than just a meme. I was now, unofficially, the face of Plitvice Peaks. My face was printed on mugs sold in the gift shop. Mugs. One had a speech bubble that said, don't stop leaving. Another had me mid-dance, legs in the air, with the caption, Folklore in Motion. I begged Petra to take them down. She ordered more. They sell out every week, she said unapologetically, sipping tea from one. But beyond the goat jokes and viral flute videos, something quieter was happening. I was settling in. I started recognizing guests who'd returned a second or third time. I knew which goats got grumpy before rain and which village Annies would bring pastries if I complimented their embroidery. I even started dreaming in a mix of English and badly conjugated Croatian. The book was coming along. I wrote in the mornings before the goats stirred, usually with Zarko hovering nearby like a judgmental editor. The more I wrote, the more I realized it wasn't a joke anymore. The story had started as one assure, but what grew from it was real. Accidentally real. My favorite kind. One afternoon, I was leading a small group on a folklore walk through the hillside trails. There was a teenage girl in the group who hung back, headphones on, uninterested. I didn't press her. Halfway through, she suddenly asked, "Is this the trail where the cheese goddess hid from the Mountain King?" I blinked. That was one of the stories I'd completely made up during a rainy day tour last month. I said yes. She took off her headphones and walked beside me for the rest of the way. That evening, she handed me a sketch she'd drawn of the cheese goddess, a fierce-looking woman holding a sword made of dairy. "You should put her in your book," she said. And I did. Around that same time, Petra pulled me aside. "We have a problem," she said, voice low. "What kind of problem?" "The Tourism Council wants to honor you with a Cultural Ambassador Award." I blinked. "That sounds like, not a problem?" She sighed. "To accept it, you have to list your credentials." "Oh," I said. There it was. The thing I'd dodged for months. The moment the house of folklore-flavored cards might collapse. "I'll figure something out," I told her. But for the first time since arriving, I wasn't sure if I could. Because now, the truth didn't just risk a reputation, it risked a story that mattered to more people than just me. The night before the award ceremony, I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the lantern outside drawing goat-shaped patterns across the wooden beams. I kept hearing Petra's voice, "You have to list your credentials," and imagining the crowd's reaction when they found out the Goat King of Plitvice was just a guy who lied on a resume after drinking half a bottle of boxed Merlot. I considered skipping the whole thing, faking a sudden stomach virus, pretending Zarko had kidnapped me. But part of me knew that if I ran now, I'd regret it more than the lie itself. So the next morning, I did the scariest thing I've done since that first flute solo. I got honest. Not with the entire village, not yet, but with Petra. We sat on a bench behind the cheese kitchen where it always smelled like dill and something slightly burned. "Petra," I said, "I need to tell you something before this goes any further." She looked at me, already bracing. I told her everything. The fake resume. The joke application. The panic. The improvisation. She didn't speak right away. Then she smiled, in that maddeningly calm Petra way. "You think I didn't know?" I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Please," she said, laughing. "You referred to goat herding as freelance livestock management in your interview. You once introduced a folktale character named DJ Butter. It was a remix of old and new. It was completely made up," she said. "But the guests loved it. They always do." I sat back, stunned. "So why? Why let me keep going?" Petra's smile softened. "Because you took it seriously. Eventually. You listened. You learned. You cared. And because stories, real or not, are only as valuable as the joy they bring. Yours brought plenty." That afternoon, I stood in the town square, wearing my Goat King sash and holding a plaque that felt heavier than it should have. The mayor handed me the award with a speech that included the phrase, "transformational authenticity," which I'm still not sure is real. I didn't mention the lie. Not yet. But I didn't feel like one anymore. When I returned to the resort, the staff threw me a surprise party. There was goat-shaped cake, colo dancing, and a framed photo of me from my first workshop with the caption, "He came. He saw. He heard it." I laughed until my face hurt. And later that night, as I walked back to my cabin under a sky full of stars, I found something hanging on my doorknob, a keychain shaped like a flute. Tied to it was a note that read, "For the next great improvisation." I didn't know who left it, but I didn't need to. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since arriving. I sat down and rewrote my resume. Not to send anywhere, not for a job, just for me. A real version. The one that told the truth. It started with, "Former office temp who once lied about goat herding and accidentally became a cultural ambassador in Croatia. Turns out, I'm surprisingly good at it." I laughed when I typed that. Because it was true. Every bit of it. Petra found me later and said, "So, are you staying?" I paused. I hadn't let myself ask that question yet. What was next? Go home and be a story at dinner parties? Try to turn this into a career and risk it all collapsing under the truth? Or stay and keep living the lie that was no longer really a lie? "Can I think about it?" I asked. She nodded. "Of course. But just so you know, Zarko's already picked your replacement if you leave. It's a broom with a smiley face taped to it." "Charming," I said. That afternoon, I went for a long walk. I followed the trail behind the goat fields, through the wildflower hills where guests rarely wandered. I passed the old apple tree where I once tried to deliver a folk tale in Croatian and accidentally proposed to someone's grandmother. The air smelled like pine and something sweet, probably leftover festival honey. At the top of the hill, I sat down, pulled out my phone, and opened the draft of my book. I scrolled through the chapters. Flute debacle, goat chase, cheese parade. All there. All ridiculous. But between the lines was something else, something I hadn't noticed until that moment. I had become someone. Not just a character. Not just a meme. But someone who mattered here. Someone kids drew pictures of. Someone tourists remembered. Someone who brought joy. I texted Petra. Let's build a program. One that trains people who don't fit anywhere else. Weirdos. Improvisers. Late bloomers. People who'd never be picked, but should be. She replied instantly. We already started. It's called the Goat School. I laughed so loud I scared a passing bird. That night, I gave my first goat school lesson. I wore the sash. The flute was on a shelf, respectfully retired. My first students included a juggler from Italy, a shy singer from Slovakia, and a retired dentist from Texas who had a secret dream of performing shadow puppet folklore. I told them my story, most of it. And I ended with this. You don't have to be born into a story to be part of one. Sometimes, you just stumble into it, trip over a goat, and decide to stay. They clapped. The retired dentist cried. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't leaving. A year to the day after I first arrived in Croatia with nothing but a suitcase, a joke resume, and blind optimism, the resort threw a celebration called Goat King Day. I tried to veto it. Petra ignored me. It's tradition now, she said. You're a walking folktale. The staff built a makeshift stage near the goat fields. Guests wore paper crowns. Someone made t-shirts that said, Bleat happens, with my face on them. Zarko, now a minor celebrity himself, was paraded around wearing a gold ribbon and briefly attempted to eat the microphone during the opening remarks. I stood at the front, looking out at tourists, locals, trainees, and that same apple tree where it all began. Petra handed me a microphone. Say something inspiring, she whispered. I took a breath. I came here because of a lie. I began. I said I knew things I didn't. I thought I'd fake it, stay a few weeks, and leave before anyone noticed. The crowd laughed. But then something weird happened. You didn't just notice me, you believed in me. And that belief turned the fake parts real. You gave me a story when I didn't even know I needed one. And now, I get to help others find theirs. I looked at my students from Goat School, seated in the front row. Some of them beaming, others visibly tearing up. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, I continued, maybe you were just in the wrong story. Or maybe your story hadn't started yet. The applause was thunderous. A small child threw a cheese wheel at my feet like an offering. I bowed. Later that night, long after the music faded and the goats settled in for the evening, I sat alone outside my cabin with a slice of cake and the last page of my book. It was blank. I thought about all the endings I could write, about coming clean, staying on, starting Goat School, becoming a legend. But I didn't write any of that. Instead, I scribbled a single sentence. The joke became the journey, and somehow, the journey became home. Then I closed the book. Zarko wandered over, bumped my knee, and sat down beside me like a judgmental cat in a goat's body. I looked up at the sky, full of stars that felt impossibly close, and whispered, not bad for a fake goat herder. A shooting star flashed across the sky like punctuation. I didn't make a wish. I didn't need to.